Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session with Atlantic Productions and the Field Museum, using technologies of the future to bring the past to life. Can I just first check that everybody can hear me? Maybe somebody can put a little tick in the box. Ah, brilliant. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Beverly. Fantastic. That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And thank you very much to Experience UK, to Ian and Tom, for putting on this fantastic conference over 2 days that gives us all a chance to get together after what's been quite a challenging few months. It's a great opportunity to reconnect with our colleagues. And my name's Emily Smith. I run my own company, Emily Smith Associates. And I'm here with my colleagues, David Barker, who is the VFX producer at Atlantic Productions, and Susan Golland, who is the exhibit designer at the Field Museum in Chicago. So give a little wave there. Great. Now, we are going to give a talk today that should share some insights into using leading edge digital technologies in museum exhibit design, using a case study that Atlantic Productions worked on with the Field Museum, which launched in December 2018. So in December 2018, the Field Museum unveiled their amazing new suite of galleries for their iconic T.rex SUE. So SUE is the most complete, the best preserved and the biggest T.rex in the world ever, which is quite some credentials, and the Field wanted to bring its new environment up to date with the latest in T.rex research, and commissioned the UK's Atlantic Productions to create a gallery-scale digital diorama that brought to life what the dinosaurs would have looked like and the environment in which they would have been walking around in. So my first question is for Susan. I remember receiving the RFP and seeing the ambition that the Field had set out for this to be the best dinosaur gallery in the world. And I would just love to hear a bit about the vision for the galleries and how you came to commission such an extraordinary suite, experiential suite for Sue to be in.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And it's really fun to have a chance to think about this project again, now that it's been a little bit of time since it's opened. So to answer your question, yes, this was not really a small undertaking that we embarked on when we started this project. So as Emily mentioned, SUE is a very famous T.rex specimen. Some of you may have heard of this specimen before, and it's been at the Field Museum since 2000. That was its sort of grand unveiling. And prior to that, SUE had been in our main hall, so kind of surrounded by this neoclassical architecture, but without really an interpretive backdrop. So visitors loved coming in and seeing SUE, but once we received this funding to redevelop elements of our dinosaur experience, and so this redevelopment of the SUE or creation of the SUE gallery is part of that. And because SUE is such a star specimen, we really wanted to create something really amazing for this dinosaur. So the sort of idea for it was that SUE is going to be moved into a gallery just that would highlight the specimen. It would be put into context because the way you enter the gallery is through our hall that teaches people about evolution. You would be learning about other dinosaurs, then you would walk into this much more sort of immersive experience through this hallway, and then you would see SUE. And from the beginning, there was this idea to create an immersive experience by using different kinds of technologies so that we would create a really dynamic experience. And so when we were engaged in that RFP process, one of the things that I remember when we were looking through the RFPs, and Atlantic Productions was part of it, I know that Atlantic had done Natural History Museum Alive, and so they had showed us some samples of some dinosaur modeling that they had already done. And I know that we really liked that because it helped us be able to picture what we might be able to do in the gallery. So that was kind of the very beginnings of the project, and kind of how all of that ended up launching.
Thank you so much. And I remember very, very early, at the earliest of stages, when we were talking together about what stories should be told on this big digital diorama, that was a very collaborative and a very detailed process. And I wonder whether, Susan, you could give us some insights into the choice of stories from the museum's perspective. And David, you could talk a little bit about how Atlantic supported the field to help make those a reality and to bring Atlantic's experience of what was possible, and how best to achieve the vision that the field had.
From the Field Museum's perspective, we have a number of paleontologists who are on staff, and scientific accuracy is certainly something that is important to us. And there had been some other, obviously there's a lot of other movies and short films and things like that that show T-Rex. We had a movie here at the museum that showed T-Rex, and we sort of looked back at all of that and looked at how some of the science has changed, and we wanted to be able to incorporate that in this new SUE digital diorama. And we did that by collaborating with the paleontologists that were on staff at the museum. There were a few things that we were thinking about. One of them was that we wanted to show T-Rex behaviors, and behaviors that we knew were backed up by scientific research. So of course we wanted to show SUE doing things like hunting and stalking, and so things that are kind of typical T-Rex behaviors. And one of the things that we also had done a little bit of visitor studies about was knowing that we wanted to show those behaviors, but also knowing that we didn't want it to be too gory and too scary, because we have a lot of children who come, they do love T-Rex, but we didn't want them to be terrified. So we did a little bit of, we had some conversations with visitors just to try to get a sense of what that level of blood and gore we could achieve, to show the accurate science, but also not to scare children. The other thing we wanted to think about was, we wanted to also show at least one other behavior of T-Rex that wasn't taking down prey and eating. So we talked about things like maybe sleeping, but there was a lot of conversation about not knowing 100% what it looks like for T-Rex to sleep. So we ended up not going with that. And we'll talk about, or you'll see a little bit later, we ended up deciding that showing T-Rex drinking would be interesting, and also be an opportunity to show a little bit of the environment that SUE would have lived in. So those were just a few of the considerations that we were making early on, and trying to narrow down to sort of 3 different scientifically vetted behavior sort of moments. And so that is where we landed early on in the process.
Thank you. And David, how did Atlantic help the Field Museum to kind of hone and refine what could be achieved using the technologies that your teams were producing in?
So we started working by writing scripts and drawing storyboards, like you see here, to suggest the different ways that we could convey the information for the Field Museum. And then we have to have the awkward conversations about, well, if you want to see SUE's mouth going into the water from above the water, that would cost you 10 times more than if we just had a shot from underneath the surface of the water and the head appeared. Because animating things such as fluids and bloods is very costly, and it doesn't really give you that much more than you would get from seeing more interesting behaviors. So the creative side of what you see and when was influenced, as Susan said, by what is accurate, but then also what's affordable within a given price point. And using filmmaking sleight of hand techniques, we were able to show Sue doing quite a number of different activities without really going into the super prohibitively expensive production technique.
Thank you so much. And in terms of, I remember that one of the narratives changed over the course of the dialogue that we had. And could you explain why and how that came to happen through the collaborations that you and the field went through?
Absolutely. So we designed this scene here, which we called the stalking scene, and as you can see in the background, we have a green T.rex that looks like it's made out of polystyrene. And in the foreground, those aren't cows, those are Edmontosauruses, which are the prey animals which Sue was hunting. So we designed the scene originally so that you would see Sue off in the distance and chasing these animals, causing a stampede, and them all running past the camera until there was a moment where Sue caught one of the younger or weaker Edmontosauruses and would devour it on camera. So the first thing that got flagged, as Susan had pointed out earlier, was children probably aren't going to want to see the death and dismemberment of an animal 10 foot high in front of them in a museum. So we had to think about how we could change the ending, which involved a kill and then a removal from the scene before the gruesome eating happened. But secondly, more fundamentally, was when we began to animate Sue accurately based on the data that we were given according to stride length and her ability to run versus walk, we realized that she would not be able to get from the back of the screen to the front of the screen in time. So we said to the team at the Field Museum, what can we do about this? It's impossible to have the chase scene as we envisaged it, and unless we have an extremely long scene and one of the Edmontosauruses is kind of stupid enough to not run away when all the other. So the cunning plan was to place trees all through the scene and for Sue to sneak through the trees so she could then ambush the prey quite close to the camera without needing to break into an anatomically impossible run, but still creating a bit of a shocking moment.
Fantastic. And we've got a little clip here, a little run of how that scene finally worked out.
Absolutely. So you'll see in the trees, Sue's sneaking through, and the general arrangement is the same before. And then here they come, grabbing the baby Edmontosaurus without any real explosion of blood and gore, as you would probably expect that kind of attack.
Thank you. And I believe that you renamed the Edmontosaurus at that point, didn't you, in the team?
Yeah, because we had about 30 or 40 of them on screen, we had to have a quick and easy way of naming them. So we had far Montosauruses, mid Montosauruses, and dead Montosaurus for the one that got eaten.
Brilliant. We are, as well as the stories themselves, Atlantic and the field collaborated on how the dioramas should be displayed in the gallery, and this is a scene of test screen. These are kind of just mock-ups from halfway through the development process. Susan, could you kind of go through the vision for the display of the diorama in the galleries, and David, how Atlantic helped advise on things like the definition that we went for, things like the split of the narrative across the screens, and how that process kind of went through.
So in terms of what we were looking for at the museum, you saw earlier on in the slides that the SUE specimen is in front of these screens. And so the screens sort of serve as this backdrop that will be constantly changing throughout your time in the gallery. And you can also walk behind it and in between it. There were a couple of things that we needed the digital diorama to do because there are a few things that are happening in the gallery. So one of them is we wanted time for the visitors to be able to just walk through and sort of see this sort of digital diorama just as kind of a backdrop. You could watch it if you wanted, but there wasn't action all the time. Then there would be these sort of moments that would draw your attention to that backdrop, and those were the sort of three key behavior moments when Sue comes on and is stalking or fighting or drinking. And then there's also a time when there's another theatrical element that happens in the gallery, and we need these screens to turn into nighttime mode, and so they become a little even more of a backdrop atmospheric sort of moment. So in order to be able to, there are a number of things we were trying to do. So figuring out when to draw attention to the screens and when they become a little more of a backdrop, and then figuring out the ideal position and angle that a visitor could view these from. There's sort of an ideal angle, but then you can also, as I said, you can kind of walk among them. The projections are rear projections, so you can see them from both sides, and trying to work on figuring out what David can speak to sort of how we were trying to figure out the positioning. But we did a bunch of prototyping. First we had wood frames, and then we were doing more prototyping in the gallery. But David, I'll let you talk about that part.
Just unmuting myself there. I'm not sure how apparent it is from this still, but actually in the museum, the screen on the left is much closer to you than the screen on the right. So we built all of the scenes assuming that we were actually working on a slanted image. And in this, what we called At the River, you'll notice that our river travels off into the distance, but on the screens which are the furthest away. And we did this in all of the scenes. So we treated the left-hand side of the screens as the foreground, and then the right-hand side as the midground, which is a bit of a different way of constructing things. But it led us to make sure that in this scene, we have Sue standing on more the left-hand side, so we can see the wonderful details that we put in of her eyes and teeth and scales. In the stalking scenes, or the Sue approached from the right and then attacked on the left-hand side, which created a false sense of perspective that she was moving over a larger distance. And we also carefully thought about the gaps in between each screen, making sure that there wasn't any action that would occur split across the scenes. And you'll see in a couple of slides' time the importance of that when we see one of Sue's regular daily activities. And ensuring that we have a nice crystal clear image on each screen was something that we talked about with the museum as far back as when they were planning on what projectors to use for each screen. So we were doing calculations of how wide the screens would be, how far away the viewer would be from the screens in general, and would they notice if each one of these projectors with HD or 4K. And that we had a conversation with the technical team at the Field Museum to establish what the ideal projectors would be for the given space.
Thank you so much, and I think that really does show in the delivery in the gallery. Now, moving on to one of my favourite images from this presentation. This is some of the feedback that David received halfway through modelling the T-Rex, and it leads me to talk about the process for ensuring that everything in those scenes is scientifically accurate. Because what is so exciting when you go into the Field Museum is that you're getting a almost Jurassic Park experience of these wonderful photoreal animations and extraordinary action. But the amazing difference is that it is entirely scientifically accurate down to every detail, really every scale. And it would be great to hear you both talk a little bit about how that process took place. Maybe first of all, Susan, tell us about how the paleontologists were involved, and David to talk a little bit through a few examples of how that manifested in your work producing the scenes.
Yeah. Well, whenever we work on an exhibition project, there's someone assigned as a content expert. And so obviously for Sue, it would be a paleontologist. So we worked with a paleontologist named Tom Cullen, and he was really fantastic. He has done research, he was doing research at the museum, and then was our go-to person on all of our meetings to help us kind of run any questions by him. I will let David talk about the details of what you're seeing on the screen, but I don't think I've worked with a scientist who has provided such detailed and amazing annotations. I was always amazed by how much information we would receive and how it made such a difference on this project. But then there were other times where we needed to go even beyond the knowledge of our paleontologists. We've talked with our paleobotany people when we were looking at what plants should be included in the scene. There were a number of fossils that were excavated when the Sue fossil was being taken out of the ground. So we based a lot of what we were going to put into these scenes on other animals and plants that were found as fossil evidence, and those are also on display in the gallery. So it all sort of ties together. So we were kind of talking with other scientists as needed. And then another really interesting element of this was we were talking about this nighttime sky, and there's a planetarium that's just down the street from the Field Museum. And so we ended up reaching out to them to ask them what the sky might have possibly looked like during the Cretaceous period and what we could show in terms of stars. So we actually had help from the planetarium in creating a sort of simulated night sky that we were able to include, which was a really fun moment of collaboration for us, because we always like it when we can tap into our neighboring institutions in Chicago.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And David, maybe you could take us through some of the interesting moments as an animator working through that feedback.
Yes, absolutely. So animators tend to work by looking for videos of animals in the real world and then copying them. So, which is fair enough if you're working on an elephant or a tiger. But when it comes to a dinosaur, where there's no video recordings of them moving, they got to they were animating just based upon what an elephant might look like if it was significantly bigger, or a rhinoceros. And of course those animals are a fraction of the size of true dinosaurs, and so we had to go back to the drawing board and not use real world animals to do the animation. And here you can see footprints of the I think this is the Edmontosaurus footprints. And the key thing here is that the small bean-shaped circles are the front legs, and then the big maple leaf shapes are the back legs. And we were told by the museum that they have never ever seen a front foot overlapping with a back foot. And so we had to then animate in order for this to happen. So we came up with a bit of a silly idea, and that was to put virtual paint onto the feet of the dinosaurs and then make movies of them walking. And we went through about 53 different iterations of this for this particular dinosaur to try and make sure that you get that zero overlap between the front and rear feet, and that the front foot is slightly outside the rear foot. And that was repeated for all of the dinosaurs. And then we tested different speeds, how quickly they can move. We've got some running, we've got some walking, we've got little ones, we've got big ones. And we sent this across to the museum and said, okay, which ones of these are real and which ones of these should we get rid of? And they said, okay, you can use 1, 2, and 7 as your animations. And that's what we then took forward to create the rest of it.
That's brilliant. And can I, just talk me through these models quickly.
So these are, one thing that we did really quite carefully was to make sure that each animal was the right size in proportion to the other animals, but then also in proportion to a human being, because we wanted to make sure that the experience, while the screens aren't as large as a dinosaur would be, we could select the framing in order that it would feel that you were looking through the environment at those gigantic animals who were the actual size as you would actually feel. So we had lots of humans scattered throughout the scenes just to make sure that the dinosaurs were measuring up. And on a technical side, it also shows the challenge of creating the patterns and textures of the skin on the different animals, because we have some which are really quite tiny and others which are really huge. And from a computational point of view, it's quite a challenge to make sure you have the same level of detail in something massive and something quite small. It was a lot of fun to do these lineups. We did them from many angles until we got it just about right.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And there was, I remember one behaviour that the field particularly wanted to show, thought that it would be very, very popular with children. And surprisingly, we ended up at Atlantic putting in the same level of detail in terms of determining the scientific accuracy of this, this behaviour. And I think there were also some pretty competitive fights in your team, David, as to who would animate this, who got to animate the T.rex poo. Now, I'll just show this scene, and then, David, you could talk us through.
Certainly. So it all happens quite quickly and discreetly. The first gust was we didn't really want to see Sue's behind in this process, but we wanted her standing in a good position so that the excrement would be at a good enough angle. And so there was a bit of a competition. I had 2 or 3 artists each animating poos coming out, which we then sent to the museum, who looked at them all and said that they were all a bit too runny. So that they said start of the Bristol stool scales. And so, since Sue was a meat eater and probably didn't drink very much water during the day, it should be a number 5 on the scale. So I won't go into details for what properties that kind of poo has, but that's what we then modified the animation to show.
Brilliant, thank you so much. That was such a fun detail. Now, moving on to the soundtrack, and this probably isn't coming over when we're showing these clips on this presentation, but I know that the Field and Atlantic collaborated on a gallery-wide soundtrack for these experiences that, again, with the same degree of kind of as much as we know of how creatures would have sounded, rigor in looking at that soundtrack. It would be great to hear a little bit more about that process from both of you.
I remember when we were starting on the soundtrack, which I think was sort of one of the later stages, we were looking at a couple of things. There's the sound, you can hear sounds like wind and other things which needed to match the what you were seeing on the screen. So if it looked like a windy day, and I remember us listening to a lot of different speeds of wind velocities. Then there's another layer of hearing things like insects. And so we spent a lot of time listening to various sort of choruses of insect noises. And you hear this from the time you walk in the gallery and even before you see these screens. And so one of the things we were making sure of, just like we were looking at with visuals, is making sure that the types of insect sounds that you would hear would be the type of insect that could have existed at the time. We also, because we want this to be a pleasant visitor experience, there were a couple of insect noises that I remember being just a little bit grating if you heard them for too long. So we were able to sort of dial some of those up and down to make sure that if you're going to be in this gallery for, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, that you're not hearing this really nagging insect sound. And then moving into the dinosaur sounds, of course, trying to think about what sound Sue would make was the biggest question, because people kind of expect Sue to roar, sort of like a lion. And so our paleontologists had gotten us in touch with some other scientists who were working on T.rex vocalizations, dinosaur vocalizations, and we had a few samples to work from, which were basically taking existing animals. There's an alligator and there was a bird, and sort of taking those vocalizations and then sizing them up to a Sue size, and sort of being able to, we listened to both of those and used that as sort of a basis for the sound that Sue makes. So it's obviously very, you would never recognize it as being either an alligator type sound or a bird sound because it's so large. But that was a really interesting process. So David, maybe you can talk a little more about that from your side.
Yes, we worked with the sound team who did many David Attenborough series. They had a vast library of natural sounds which they could employ. And the soundscapes which Susan described with the various animal noises were real recordings of forests, jungles, plains, and so on. So we would send those to the field museum and say, does this work? And get feedback saying, well, unfortunately, there's bird species you can hear in that particular track. So then the sound engineers would find cunning ways of just removing the individual sounds that shouldn't be there from that sound signature, using quite advanced sound wave analysis techniques, which, to be honest with you, I don't really understand. I saw them doing it and it was quite spectacular. So, for example, the irritating chirrup as well that Susan didn't like, they surgically removed from the sound wave. So rather than going and having to find brand new sounds or building them without the pieces that we didn't need, we were able to sculpt existing sounds of nature to fit perfectly to the scenes. And we then did the sound design to fit nicely into the hall. So looking at the placement of the speakers in the hall, we were careful about where would the high-pitched sounds occur in space, where would the low-pitched sounds occur in space, so that there was a natural immersive feeling for when the soundtrack kicked in, which was only really possible because the museum shared with us their designs for where they were going to install the speakers at a very early stage. So we knew from the moment we began sound design exactly how we should build it spatially.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And I don't think that this will play the sound well, but just to get a sense of one of the most dramatic scenes. That's one nil type Triceratops there. Just in terms of the gallery has now been open since December 2018. It opened to great critical acclaim. Susan, can you tell us a little bit about how visitors have responded to the experience?
Yeah, well, I joke about this by saying that I think it's too early in my museum career to have been part of a project this successful, because I'm not sure that I will be able to be on a team on a project that is more successful than this one. People love Sue, and they love this gallery for so many different reasons. Recently, we did some visitor observations, and I thought this would be a good one to share. So people interact with the media in a really interesting way in this space. I think I don't know exactly what the formula is, but because I think it feels so immersive, they feel like they can respond to it. And so in this recent visitor observation, there were some children who were in the gallery, and when Sue was fighting with the Triceratops that you just saw, they were cheering for Sue. And I don't think that it's so sweet when people do that. And I think we're finding that that's happening, where visitors are staying longer to watch these scenes. Also, they're seating, and they'll sit and they'll watch. And then sometimes if they don't see something like the poo moment, they may stop and watch for longer so they can wait for the cycle to go through. But the visitors just really are engaged with it. And I think part of it is the form factor. It's so big. Those screens are so big, and you can walk among them, so you can immerse yourself in this really interesting way. But I mean, visitors really love it. Whenever I have time and I'm at the museum, I go down and I just watch people in the gallery, and it's just so delightful. People are just so happy to be in that space. And so we've gotten a lot of reviews, just newspaper reviews, other things like that, with really positive things to say about the level of immersion and sort of theatricality in this gallery. I don't think I would change anything about it at this point. People are just really love it so much.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. And I know when David and I came over for the opening, we saw a child of about 5 stay for 3 cycles, which 3 20-minute cycles of the animations, and its mother could not drag it away. It was really nice. So obviously it's been incredibly successful for visitors and for the field. It would be great to get your final thoughts on what made the project such a success from both of you, from the field's perspective and from the creative producer's perspective.
So on our side, we had a digital project manager who helped us work with Emily and David and their team. And I remember when we were starting this process, and I know that she had said, it's so important for us to start thinking about media really early on in our exhibit projects. And I think this was one project where that did happen. We started really early on with this collaboration. And I think having a specific media project manager, digital project manager to interface with your team was really, really helpful and helped to keep us on track. David, you had mentioned these budget considerations, and all of these things can also just take a lot of time. And to have that strong collaboration early, and to have the strong project management on both sides, I think really helped us to make sure that this was successful. I also should mention we had to open this gallery 3 months earlier than we expected, and we did. So, I mean, if we didn't have such a strong collaboration and we're really on top of things, I have no idea how we would have been able to do that.
Fantastic. And David, from the perspective of somebody who's working with a lot of different clients producing content, what made this project so strong and this collaboration so strong?
I think just to reiterate what Susan said, the importance of having a producer on both ends who work together as a team from the moment of conception through to the moment of delivery is very important. It makes life so much easier when both ends are managing the production together and working collaboratively. And I think the second thing was, as Susan had mentioned, that to involve the media team at the very beginning is extremely helpful as well, because it enables a dialogue which you wouldn't have otherwise. And if the hall had already been designed and we were told exactly what we needed to do and when, I think it would have constrained us and caused us to have to make compromises which wouldn't have really been for the benefit of the production. And although it might seem a bit luxurious to start so early, I think in the long run it does save money as well, because a lot of the time is spent thinking things through rather than doing and making mistakes. So that is highly important, and as is just a very high level of communication, constant chats. And the Field Museum were one of the best clients I've ever worked with for providing feedback as and when we needed it in order to keep things running smoothly, and also for adhering to the production pipeline which I had suggested to them. So we worked on things in the order that they should be worked on, and then didn't backtrack and go back and make changes afterwards to things. So having a very clear, well signposted sign-off process, while it sounds boring, does make a production run very smoothly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for both Susan and David for joining this session. I'm with you both that it's definitely, I mean, my top project is my career to date. I think it's really exciting in the galleries, and it's great to see the insight into the detail and how it came about. So let me look and scour the chat for questions. I can see that some have come through. I'm going back to the beginning and I'll work through. So there's a question from Richard Hall about budget and length of time from concept to installation. I can't speak to what the Field Museum would talk about in terms of budget. What I can say from Atlantic Productions' point of view is that, as David has explained, we can work with clients to achieve what they would like to see in their galleries, using our technical skills to advise narrative approaches to make things possible. So and that it's very hard to say what an off-the-peg budget looks like for 3 minutes of animation, because as Susan will remember, it depends on how many creatures are in there, how they're behaving, what they're interacting with, how complex those interactions are. All adds up to very different price points. So I don't know, Susan, if you'd like to talk about the kind of overall project planning at the Field and how long that took.
Yeah, I was trying to think about when we started. I think we worked together for a little over a year, if that sounds about right. And I think the overall project was, I think, about a year and a half or almost 2 years of planning. I don't, in terms of budget numbers, I don't have it offhand because our project, since I don't do the project management side of things, but I know that our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So if anyone does have questions that, maybe I need to dig into some more details, we can try to do that for you. I can say that since the media was planned so early on, and that we knew this would be a very media-heavy gallery, we put a lot of our funds towards that purpose. But I don't have the exact number.
Thank you so much. And then there's a question here from Sophie Pigott. That's a nice question. Do you share the making of with your audiences? I'm sure they'd be interested.
I know, that's a good question. So we have docents that normally do interpretation in the gallery, and when we opened, we did an orientation with the docents and we give them some of that background information. So it's up to each of them to decide how much of that to incorporate. But it's actually a good reminder that, especially as the museum is now open again, I should check back and see and find out how much of that they're able to share, because we have all of these amazing assets that show that process. So it's not part of the formal interpretation, but it is something that when we have our gallery guides, they can incorporate that.
Thank you. And question from Danielle Barron, did we look at taking the immersion a step further with a headset experience?
We had talked about there being some type of VR experience or something like that. Because of the way that this gallery is set up, it's part of it's not a ticketed experience, and there are not, you don't need to check in at the intro to the gallery. So I think we didn't really consider having an additional, either a headset or you know, any other kind of VR, just because it would require us to have a little bit more of a facilitation of someone there to provide those headsets and things like that. We have a 3D gallery or a 3D movie area where that is sort of built into that experience. So I think that's kind of why we moved towards these the big screens that would just allow you to come in at any moment and have that immersion.
That's great. And actually, interestingly enough, the way that the media itself has been designed means that it would be an easier step to take those scenes into a VR experience, you know, should you want to in the future. So I think as a takeaway for people who are looking at commissioning this kind of work, that's definitely something that can be done. It just depends on how that falls for each individual museum in terms of its gallery plans and its touring plans, etc. And then, have you ever considered a 4D experience with fans for wind and smells? That makes me think of the T.rex poo. I might clear the gallery.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like, so we didn't opt for that particular route, but one thing that we did do is we added, there's a station within the gallery called Sensing Sue's World, and we incorporated smells in that area where you can opt into the smell where you flip something up and you can smell pleasant smells like flowers that would have existed at the time, but there's also a Sue's breath, which is rotting meat, and it's a horrific smell. And I think that visitors like to kind of flip it open and smell it, but we thought, you know, for some visitors who maybe would be a little more squeamish, let's give them a chance to opt in or out. So that's how we ended up making that decision. But I could see another museum going, you know, making a choice to do something even more immersive. But that was the route that we chose.
Okay, thank you. And John McAdam, can online visitors walk through the gallery? It looks wonderful. I know there is a video that the field have created for the launch, but it's not a virtualization of the gallery.
At the moment, I don't think we have a virtual walkthrough. There was a video not that long ago where the mayor of Chicago was given a tour through the gallery, so you can find that one online. I think that's probably the more recent video of it, but at the moment we don't have sort of a virtual visit kind of as far as I know.
Once the world is a more settled place, John, maybe you can book a flight to Chicago and put it on expenses. bit of research. Great. So I think we're kind of coming to the close now. Just final opportunity. Are there any more questions before we say goodbye? It looks like we're all done. Just to say our contact details, I must just share those here with enough time for people to write them down. Our contact details are here. If anybody working in museums is thinking of how to bring ancient or inaccessible scenes to life in amazingly detailed CGI, then please come to us at Atlantic Productions, to either myself or David, and we can help you with those plans and with that vision. And Susan has very kindly also said that she'll take any questions about the project that any of you may have. And thank you so much for joining us. It's late in the day for this presentation. We thank you for staying with us too. Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.